This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and today's interview is being recorded in front of a live audience here at the 2016 Limmud Conference in Birmingham, UK. My guest today is a historian of the Jewish community of Sudan, who herself is a descendant of that community. Her website, Tales of Jewish Sudan, is a repository of the history as well as stories and recipes of the now-defunct community. Daisy Abboudi, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Sudan's neighboring countries, if you look at Egypt and Libya and even Ethiopia to an extent, have had ancient as well as well-established Jewish communities. Why was Sudan different? Why didn't the Jews ever settle there en masse?
Well, that's actually a very good question. I think because it just wasn't on the radar. I mean, in terms of being settled by European colonies or European powers, Sudan, it was too far south. It wasn't far developed enough in that early period for Jews to come. Jews started coming when it was taken over by the Turkish Empire. The Turkish Empire, through Egypt, took over Sudan in the 1820s, and only a very few Jewish families settled then. The majority of Jews came after that with the British Empire. The British Empire built a railway from the top of Egypt all the way down to Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, and that's when the Jewish traders and that's when the community started to really flourish. So they came from the Middle East.
So what were their origins predominantly? Were there initially Egyptian Jews?
They were Egyptian, Syrian, Iraqi, Turkish, Lebanese, a few Ashkenazi families as well after World War II, British soldiers, very few as well. But that's where they mostly came from the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. And why was Khartoum in Sudan an attraction for them?
It was a new British condominium. It had a brand new railway line. It had a brand new city. Well, Khartoum wasn't a new city, but it was a newly developing city. And they were economic migrants. It was a good place to start up your business.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what were really the economic features of the community? What sort of trades did they?
They were traders mostly of textiles, haberdashery. There was some of them worked in offices in the banks with the British government as well. But yeah, mostly they had shops, haberdashery shops. That was the most. And then some of them expanded, importing and exporting as the years went by.
And was there any Jewish infrastructure left there when they came? Because there had been a tiny Jewish community before the British era that had been eradicated.
So there were these during the Turkish, there was a rebel who made them all convert to Islam, and then when the British came, some of them converted back and some of them didn't. The ones that converted back, they'd built a small, not really built, but they'd established a tiny synagogue and a cemetery. But no, they built the community from scratch, really.
So what can you tell us about the first wave of the Jewish community there, the very small Jewish community that was there before the British came?
Before the British came? Honestly, not a lot. There's not a lot of documentation. Everything that has been written has been destroyed. We've got the names of some of them, not even all of them. So really, I can't tell you a lot, unfortunately.
How pioneering is your research? Has anyone worked on the history of Jewish Sudan?
So there's one book written by the son of the late Chief Rabbi Malka, Eli Malka. He wrote a book on the Jewish community of Sudan when he was in his 80s. In the 90s, he wrote that book. It's kind of a history and a little bit about his family as well, and there's been a small documentary made about it. My work is, I would say, maybe pioneering because I'm interviewing the people that remember the community. I tell their stories in their own words as they remember it, and I don't edit or judge what they say. If someone tells me that something happened, I'll take that as it happened. And that's their memory, and I'm not going to change their memory and what they believe happened.
There was very little left of the community after the mid-50s, 1950s.
Yeah, the last Jews really, well, there were a tiny few left in the 70s, but most of them left after 1967 war. The Arab League happened, Khartoum, the Three No's and all of that. So it wasn't a comfortable place for Jews, and they all left at that period.
It took them a while.
It took them a time.
But if you look at, the tensions really all over the Middle East started coming to the fore in the 40s, and all the more so after 1948. So if they stayed there for another 20 years, that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, Sudan was a little bit different to the rest of the Middle East for a whole load of other reasons, but by 1967 they'd gone, and so they are old now. They're in their 80s, they're in their 90s.
Where did they go?
They're fun. They're fun people.
Yeah, I'm sure they probably cook very well and sing very well.
Yeah, they
we'll
do.
get to that in a second. Where did they go? And how many are we talking about when on the eve of the destruction of a community? How many members?
I wouldn't say there was like a point of the destruction. It was quite gradual that people were leaving. Mm-hmm. The height of the community, the synagogue housed 500 to 600 people. There may be more people, maybe 800, 1,000 has been posited as well. So around that much in total, considering there were only 8 million people. But there were 8 million people in Sudan. That's a tiny, tiny community. They now they live in Israel, England, America, and Geneva is where they lived. Geneva because some of them left as refugees, and they settled in Geneva.
You said that they came from all over the Middle East, and I'm wondering whether they developed some kind of unique features to them, the same way that, the Lebanese Jews did or the Egyptian Jews did. Is it something that's really uniquely Jewish Sudanese?
Well, I think because they were such a massive melting pot, it was such a small community, and they all married each other. You didn't have the Egyptians and the Syrians, and they all married each other, and their food culture mashed into each other. And they absorbed some of the Sudanese food culture as well. And they were, by today's standards, probably, I don't know, were they a very religious community? Probably not. They were traditional, and they kept, Yom Kippur and Pesach and Shabbat, and there were religious members. There was amazing, Chief Rabbi Malki was great, and then another Rabbi Elbaz, and so they had that, but they weren't a particularly religious community. So it was a very cultural thing, and I think what's so fascinating to me is that they were only really there, the majority of them were only really there for maybe 2 generations, maybe 80 years, and they've got this really strong identity as Sudanese Jews. And how does that happen in such a short space of time, and why? And I find that very interesting.
How do you explain it?
Honestly, I don't know. I think it was a golden period of Sudan at that time. It was a really happy life that they had. It was very multicultural. They had, Eid with their Muslim neighbours. They had Christian neighbours, Greek neighbours. It was a very carefree kind of lifestyle when it was going well, and I think that's what they remember so fondly, and that kind of anchors them back. And they have kept in touch. The way I've conducted my research is word of mouth. This one tells that one, who tells that one, who tells that one, and that's how I've made my connections as well. Mm-hmm.
That was going to be my next question, but moving on to tell us a bit about your own personal connection to that history. Obviously, you didn't pick that at random.
No, I didn't. All of my grandparents either were born in or lived in Sudan. They were part of the wave that came in the early 1900s, and that's the connection.
Mm-hmm. And when did you feel that you wanted to start researching?
Oh, they used to tell me these amazing stories when I was a kid. Like my bedtime stories in bed would be, these stories of like sand. They used to sleep outside. Life happened outside because it was so hot. And there's these like stories of like sandstorms coming, and like they'd have to like wake up and rush back inside, and they'd wake up and the rain would be falling, and there'd be open air cinemas, and it was all just this fantastical stories. And I just thought it's going to be such a shame if these stories are lost. They're so special, and they're also really funny. Like they're funny people. So I think it's just really important to keep them and preserve them.
Yeah, because a big part of your research pertains to the folklore of that community, stories and recipes, and what their daily lives really looked like. Can you share with us perhaps one of the more peculiar stories, one that really stood out of the many that did?
Well, that's quite difficult. So there's my great-grandfather was quite a joker, and he had a shop, and every day the wives would send food to their husbands in their shops at lunchtime. And his neighbor in the neighboring shop every day would come to his shop and look at what he's got to eat and be like, oh, that looks really delicious, and pick out all the bits of meat and eat all the meat and leave him just the vegetable stew. And he wasn't very happy about this after a while. So he got a shoe. He had a shoe shop. He took the shoe to his wife and he was like, cook this in the stew next time you cook my lunch. So he did that. She did it. She thought he was a bit mad, but she did it. And the next day, as predicted, the neighbor comes, starts rummaging through his food to see what he's got, and starts picking out the meat, and he starts chewing it and chewing it and chewing it and chewing it. And he's like, you need to tell your wife to sort out her cooking. This is terrible meat. And he's like, oh, you idiot, you've been eating a shoe. And from that day on, the neighbor never came to steal his meat again. So that's probably one of the more out there stories.
Did you ever go to Sudan?
No, I've never been to Sudan.
No?
There's not much that I think that I could gain going there now. Nothing is left, and anything that is left in the archives you can't access. The government won't let you access anyway, so there's nothing I can gain by actually going.
What about buildings? Is the synagogue still?
The synagogue is, I believe, a bank or offices now. The synagogue was on the main boulevard of Khartoum, so that was sold and bought up. There is a cemetery, Jewish cemetery in Khartoum, but it's a dumping ground now for used car parts. There's a small effort to clean it up that's happening at the moment, but
is any official Jewish organization, or maybe the Israeli government or anyone, is it on anybody's radar?
Apart from this man in Israel who's cleaning up the community, he's called Chaim Motzen, and he's trying to clean up the cemetery, but he's doing it privately and nothing to do with the government at all.
All right. Well, hopefully this podcast will change something. I don't know. All right. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. Has anyone got a question?
Okay. Thank you. It's so interesting. I was wondering, because in Israel we just recently celebrated the Sigd holiday of the Ethiopian Jewry and learned of their stories of immigration to Israel. And mostly it involved trying to cross Sudan and it being very dangerous, and many people were killed passing through Sudan. I was wondering if the Jewish Sudanese community had relations of any type with the Jews of Ethiopia at any point throughout the history.
Not that I know of. They were connected to the Egyptian community. They were a part of the Egyptian Bet Din, but not the Ethiopian community as far as I know of.
Any more questions?
I'm interested in specific food cultures. Can you talk about that were specific to Sudan?
So there's okra was quite a big food source. It's a Sudanese dish. They used to sun dry it, pound it up, make it into a, I don't know, pudding for want of a better word. That's called mulach, and that was probably specific to the Jewish, because it's a Sudanese dish that was absorbed into the Jewish community. So I don't think that really comes into play elsewhere. There's molochia, the Egyptian soup, kubeba, which is semolina and rice filled with mincemeat, dumplings, and that's cooked in many, many different ways. In soups, it's fried, it's all sorts. Everything was natural, everything was fresh. They didn't have fridges until the 50s, really, and you'd have someone coming to your door every day to sell you your fish and your meat and your vegetables, and peanuts as well, because that's huge in Sudan. So it was a very, buy and eat as you go kind of culture. Amazing desserts too, baklava and all sorts like that.
All right. Daisy Abboudi, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And also big thanks to Tammy Goldenberg, our sound engineer, and to the Van Leer Institute for their generous support. If you like this podcast, there are many more where it came from. Just go to www.tlv1.fm/podcasts and take your pick. Our co-host, Dalia Shendlin, will be back with us shortly. But in the meantime, don't forget to visit our new website, telavivreview.org, like us on Facebook, and follow me on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.
תמיד קראנו באותו הספר, ואנחנו באותו עמוד. שמות חיבה, ריקוד פרטי רק שלנו, הכל הלך לנו בדיוק. עד שעזב לי את היד, זו שנגנה שיר אהבה, ממשיכה מכאן